Good evening. I want to thank everybody for coming tonight. This is kind of our joint meeting for our mobility plan and then mobility fee, but also we had a bike ped master plan update. Our last bike ped plan, I believe, was 2012 was the official. It was occurring over a couple years there. So it's 12 years old. It's pretty old. We've done a lot of projects. So we needed to do an update for the bike ped master plan, and then it just kind of all worked out at the mobility plan. There's a lot of overlap between the two. So it made sense to do them both at once. So thank you for everybody attending. Um, I was going to say something else. If you do want more information or just want to put your name down, you can sign in at the back. Please, you can do that. And there's little comment cards back there. So if you have any comments and you don't want to just talk to one of us and tell us, please write them down in the back. That would be great. And then we can put them on kind of an official record to make sure we take care of any concerns or ideas people have, because we see this stuff all the time. So your ideas are often great ones because it's thinking differently than we're thinking. So we appreciate them. So I'm going to pass this over to Manny Rodriguez, and he's going to do a little presentation for the bike ped master plan.
Thank you, Chad. Well, good evening, everybody. My name is Manny Rodriguez. I work with Kimley Horn. And my team here today is Mike Woodward, original project manager of the 2012 Bike Fit Master Plan, and Kelly Wing, also with the team. So I'm going to give a quick overview of our process and expanding upon the first master plan. As you can see, we have some boards here. We have the existing network as it is today, and our future are in network with plan and recommended improvement. So the original 2012 master plan, it was very extensive. There's a lot of public involvement. It included multiple elements that included signage, trails, sidewalk, you name it. That was really, really well done back in the day. But as we all know, things already, already performed. There's one project that's already constructed. I heard somebody saying that they're loving that trail that was planned for back in 2012. So we're expanding and updating. The first thing we did a full inventory of what's already built. We did site visits, rode our bikes throughout the city just to see how does it feel to be in the city of Longwood, what connections make sense, what could be improved. And we came up with a pretty good list of either share use path, potential share use path, bike lanes that could be added, sidewalks that needed to be improve, extended or replaced. And we looked at, how much would they cost? Like we developed some high level plans and prioritize them between like it's going to take low, medium, and high time to implement those. And those are here in shown in this map here on my left side. I'm probably forgetting something else, Mike. That's kind of about it, the process. Yep. So a little bit of our projects, just to chime in. The project that was already built is kind of here in the back of what's the name of the park? Ryder Park. That was one trail. Yep. That's right. Candyland. Yeah, Candyland. That project already built. Projects included the share use path along the existing utility line. Some of these projects would be corridor studies, or we have to look more deeper into them, like range line, for example. There was a project that we feel that something needed to be done, but we didn't quite know exactly at the time. So that's an example of like we need to put more thoughts into this. But most of these examples just like adding bike lanes and expanding the existing network to make it more friendly for bicycle and pedestrians. Mainly our goal today is to just get your input. There's really not much to expand on this, but we want to hear what your thoughts are. How do you guys feel biking and walking around Longwood? If there's any project that we should look at and add into our plan that the city wants to consider, we want to hear your input. We want to include it in the plan and integrate it in the whole network. That's really the goal here today. We can provide a bunch of plans, a bunch of ideas, a bunch of projects, but if we don't get that community input, it really it's just going to be like this bubble plan. So your input is super important. After Lawrence presents, we want all y'all to comment forward and mark it up. I want to see sticky notes and all your ideas. Here's we can implement it in the final master plan. Um, and with that being said, I'll leave it to Lauren. Oh, yeah, and we also want to hear what are your 2 or 3 priorities in terms of projects? If you can think about that while you see Lauren's presentation, if you can kind of brainstorm like, hey, this is the top 2 things or 3 things that I really, really want. We want to hear that from you guys because we really want to incorporate that in the plan as well.
So I forgot to mention on the back table, there's a copy of the full bike ped master plan update. I have a couple other maps because I think somebody's looking at, I'll put the maps back there so you can look at them a little easier than just here. Eric has them up on the screen there. But then there's also 2 copies of the mobility plan and one of the mobility fee report. It's a very detailed report. It's like almost 200 pages. So you can look at those 2 at your leisure. And like he said, we want to, after we're kind of done with some of the presentations, after Lauren speaks, we'll go have a little break before we come back and talk about the mobility fee. We're waiting for the other speaker. And during that time, you can maybe put Post-it notes on different things that you'd like to see or anything else. One thing I did want to mention is we're coming to the end of our 1 penny sales tax and we're finishing up a lot of projects. So in the next year, pretty much less than a year, probably 8 months, we're going to be finishing up a number of projects. So there's some more sidewalk projects that we're doing right now. In the next, like I said, in the next 6 months, some of them are, we're doing Florida, we're going to do some on Magnolia, we're doing some different sidewalk over on 14th and 12th. And then we're doing, we call it South Longwood Phase 1, and then hopefully South Longwood Phase 2, which is basically all the streets from 434 south all the way to like Wildmere and even over. We're making some of those connections. If anybody's familiar, we're adding those sidewalks too. And there's some other places we're trying to do sidewalk connections. If people have been around Longwood long enough, they know that there's these neighborhoods. They have sidewalks, but then there's no connection from the sidewalk in the neighborhood to the road, like Range Line or to the church. So we're trying to add some of those little sections in over the next, 8 months or so too. So I just want to mention that, but I will introduce Lauren. She's with New Urban Concepts. I was thinking we have a contractor called New Wave, and I'm thinking New Wave in my head, but I knew that was wrong. So New Urban Concepts, Lauren Rushing, and she will talk about our mobility plan. Thank you.
I'm actually going to stand over here because I do need to see my screen. Sorry about that. Okay, so welcome everybody and thank you for being here. I'll give you a forewarning. I'm a little bit more long-winded than Manny, so buckle in and get settled for a little bit, but we'll give you a break after my presentation and before we get into talking about the next topic. So my name is Lauren Rushing. I'm a transportation planner and principal planner with New Urban Concepts. We just heard some information from Manny about their work updating the bicycle and pedestrian master plan. And now we're going to talk about a separate but related effort that the city has undergone in parallel to the bike ped plan. And that is the mobility plan and the mobility fee. My colleague and the principal of New Urban Concepts will join us a little bit later to talk about the mobility fee portion of this. And I just realized I don't have the clicker. All right, so the mobility plan is a vision for the city's transportation system to transition from one that is focused primarily on moving vehicles and moving them quickly to moving people safely. It is a long-term plan. It looks 22 years into the future at a 2045 planning horizon, and it identifies project needs at a high level. So that's important to keep in mind as we move through this presentation and as you make comments on the plan tonight, that these are not projects that are in design or final design. We're talking about high-level recommendations. And so what we want to hear from you is your feedback really on the overall vision that we're proposing for the city's mobility system, as well as some of the concepts that we've proposed in the plan. And so finally, the mobility plan is also required by Florida statute to serve as a basis for the development of a mobility fee. And so you might ask, okay, Longwood is updating the bike ped plan. You also have a capital improvements program that deals with roadway projects. So why really do you need a mobility plan? And this is a great question. And the reason being is because it provides a comprehensive vision to guide transportation capital projects and development within the city. You always fare better when you have needs identified on a plan, right? So that this plan is going to help the city balance community growth with reducing congestion. That's one of the major issues that most cities are facing today, right? So Florida has traditionally been very pro-growth, but we're all reaching a tipping point where a lot of our roads are built out. We're sitting in congestion more than we ever have. And so we're realizing that not everyone is going to be able to get around using a car for every single trip. And so the mobility plan is helping Longwood think differently about how to do things and how to design roadwork projects throughout the city. And it's providing a framework for innovation in that way. One of the most significant benefits that we've seen in real time in other communities that we've worked in is that having a mobility plan not only serves as a basis for a mobility fee, which acts as its own funding mechanisms to then fund the projects that are proposed in the mobility plan, but it also helps you leverage other funding opportunities. So we've seen communities take these projects and get them into the regional transportation plan. We've seen mobility plans help communities be more competitive when it comes to applying for assistance programs and grants. And we've also seen mobility plans and fees be leveraged to enter into public-private partnerships to get projects built. There were 8 guiding elements that guided the overall vision and the projects that we've recommended in this plan. And I won't go through all of these because they're pretty standard, but I'll point out the last one, which is social value. So we wanted to take an opportunity with this plan to think about how can we leverage transportation projects to create places within the community that add social value. These are the overarching goals for the plan. So those include improving mobility through the implementation of complete streets, enhancing placemaking and spurring redevelopment, implementing strategic parking solutions, which would include providing first and last mile solutions to the Sunrail station, as well as improving multimodal accessibility and focusing on Vision Zero and safe streets for all. So this plan also has a strong focus on safety. The mobility plan itself consists of 3 sub-plans. The Complete Streets Plan looks at recommended projects for street and multimodal corridors. The Intersection and Parking Plan looks at both vehicular and multimodal improvements for intersections, as well as mid-block crossings and parking strategies. And then we also have a separate subplan that looks at what additional plans, studies, programs, and policies should the city engage in as follow-up initiatives after the mobility plan is adopted to help further facilitate the projects in the plan. So there's a wide variety of multimodal infrastructure that we've recommended in the plan, both off and on street facilities. So for your off-street facilities, you have your standard sidewalks, shared use paths, multi-use trails. And then we've also recommended a couple of boardwalks, which I'll get into. We have incorporated the bike ped plan into the mobility plan so that the bike ped projects can be taken into account when we're developing the mobility fee. So the bike ped plan, of course, recommends bike lanes, buffered bike lanes, as well as a few bicycle boulevards. And then we have recommended a few curbless shared streets, which is a concept I'll also talk about here in a minute. My clicker has stopped working. Should I just tell? Oh, there we go. Now it's working. Okay. So this is the mobility plan map, and this doesn't visualize all of the projects in the plan, but just those that we could put on a map. So it looks at the street and multimodal corridors, as well as intersections and mid-block crossing projects. And the idea is that between the bike ped plan and the mobility plan, the end result would be a well-connected and integrated multimodal system that allows people to move around Longwood with or without a car. And so when we talk about moving people, this is what we mean. We've seen a wider and wider variety of mobility devices and ways in which people are moving around cities these days. And we want to encourage that. We want to accommodate that because when we do, it makes for a more sustainable and a safer street environment for everyone. But it also provides more independence for people that otherwise wouldn't have much independence in a car-focused society, right? So we're talking about people with disabilities. If anyone wants to talk to me about it, I actually lived in the Netherlands for a few years, and one of the most striking things to me was that it's not just bikes that were using all of the bike lanes, right? So people who would otherwise be very dependent on others to get around now have mobility because you're providing multimodal facilities for them to use. And the same goes for older people and the young who can't drive yet. And so one way in which we do this is by planning for complete streets. And for those that aren't familiar, complete streets are streets that are planned, designed, and maintained with people of all ages and abilities in mind. And there's no one size fits all for a complete street. They look different depending on the context. Not every complete street is going to accommodate every type of transportation mode, but the idea is that you would have a complete network so that you could get around by various modes. The city of Longwood does have a complete streets policy that it adopted in 2021 that says that all transportation projects and transportation facilities have to be designed with all people and all modes in mind. And so to get into some of the proposed projects, we did include a few projects that had been already identified on state and county roads through other plans. Those are mostly included just to emphasize those projects and to show the importance of the connectivity that they create for the multimodal network. So you have what we call complete street retrofits. So that would be a street that is an existing street, but it's being reconstructed to add bike lanes, add a shared use path, et cetera, et cetera. And so there are already some projects in the works for Ronald Reagan, 434, and 17. In addition to those projects, we've recommended 2 new complete streets, and one is the extension of Savage Court and Bennett Drive. And it looks like some of these maps aren't turning out too well on this, so I apologize for that. But I'll get into that a little bit more here in a minute. We've also proposed 2 additional projects, 1 additional trail project and 1 additional shared use path. We didn't look too much at paths and trails because, as I mentioned, we've incorporated the bike ped plan into the mobility plan. And you guys had already made a lot of great recommendations, so we didn't have too much to add there. But one thing we did discuss with Shad was the opportunity to add a trail on the east side of Candyland Park. There's some extra right-of-way that could lead from Arbor Dog Park down to is it Longdale or Longsdale? Longdale, okay, I spelled that wrong. But would provide some connectivity and we think could be a nice amenity for the park there. And then we've also recommended a shared use path on West Church Ave between Rangeline and Warren Ave. Now, this street already has a bike lane and a sidewalk today. But the thinking behind this was, again, we're looking 22 years into the future, right? And so you've got your downtown historic district, you've got Ryder Park, there's some redevelopment slated for the hospital site, which in my understanding is that it will be a mixed village with around 30,000 square feet of retail. I can't remember if there was a number for the number of units. But the point is that looking into the future, we really want to encourage redevelopment in your historic downtown district and enhancing the train station area. And so as that happens, the West Church Ave will be a more and more important multimodal connection. So when that street has a sidewalk that's ready for an upgrade, we'd like the city to take a look at putting a higher quality path there. And so we talked about the social value that transportation plans can provide. In our mobility plans, New Urban Concepts likes to take things a couple steps beyond what you would traditionally get with your standard transportation plan. And so we wanted to think about how can certain streets within Longwood be places not only to move people, but that would be destinations themselves within the city that could be places where residents could connect with one another and feel part of a larger community and would be places that really play a larger role in what it means to be a resident in Longwood, and what Longwood is really what it's known for, right? And so when I think about the cities that I like to spend time in, I usually think about scenes like this. Beautiful, aesthetic, streetscape, places that offer a lot of things to do, and places that attract a lot of people. And so in order to do that, one of the things that we are proposing is a concept called curbless shared streets. And curbless shared streets are streets that are typically at a very low posted speed limit. So ideally 15 miles per hour or less. They, just like the name says, they don't have curbs, so the entire right-of-way is flattened, and all modes share all of the street space, right? So sometimes there is a designation between what is your pedestrian frontage, and that can be distinguished by varying pavement or pavement markings. But the idea is that out of the chaos of sharing the same space, people slow down, they take their time, they pay attention, and the street environment becomes safer for everyone. And then it also opens up opportunities for what the street is for, right? So it's no longer just for moving cars. Now maybe we can put some tables out here. Maybe we can have some events. And so curbless shared streets are also often designed that you could close the street during various events to cars. And so we have two examples here. The bottom right is, I think it's Rosemary Street in West Palm Beach. And then the top right is a little bit closer to home, and you may recognize it's Crane's Roost in Altamont Springs. So these are two examples of curbless shared streets in Florida that we have seen be wildly successful. And I'll go back just a minute. The bottom left-hand corner is also Crane's Roost in Altamont Springs. So they even have a farmer's market. They have tons of events in that area. So this is what we envision in Longwood. And we have proposed curbless shared streets on West Church Avenue and Warren Avenue between West Church and Ronald Reagan, and then as well as Wilma Street. So that's right outside. And again, this is a long-term plan. These streets are already some of your more aesthetic streets in the city. But these streets are right adjacent to Ryder Park. They're also adjacent to the hospital site, which will be redeveloped. And so we have a strong belief, and we have seen in other communities that streets like this can really do a lot for redevelopment and for placemaking. Okay, so moving on, another project that we are proposing, we're calling the Island Lake Boardwalk. So I mentioned the extension of Savage Court and Bennett Drive, and you'll see that as the green dotted line on the right side of the map. That's right near an industrial park, and there have been conversations with the landowner over the years about expanding that park. If the park is expanded, there may be some opportunities for the city to accept a land donation in lieu of impact fees that could be used to create a recreational area on the wetlands here. So a lot of that property isn't really useful for the developer, so that might be an enticing agreement for them. And so in thinking about that and how we leverage the mobility plan to create new public spaces in the community, in anticipation of that opportunity, we're also recommending a boardwalk that would connect these shopping and retail centers along State Road 434. In the top left area, you also have the Cascades Senior Living Center, and that whole area is identified on the future land use map as an area for mixed use redevelopment. So again, as areas are redeveloping, how do we provide multimodal connectivity? We think a boardwalk would be really cool in this area, and even better if it could connect down to some of the residential areas in the county. And so again, we're looking to Altamont Springs a lot for inspiration here. You all may be familiar with Crane's Roost. They have a boardwalk system there. So what we're thinking is maybe something on a little bit smaller scale than that. And then you even have already a really, really small scale example of that here in Ryder Park, which is the picture in the top right-hand side. So those two pictures just kind of visualize what we had in mind for that area. The mobility plan also addresses parking. So we've included a catch-all project, which would allow the city to develop up to 40 on-street parking spaces throughout the city and in the downtown area. I can talk about that in more detail with everyone, but some of the idea behind that was that when you are looking to redevelop historic downtowns, the city has parking minimum requirements. And if a small business owner comes in and wants to develop just one lot, sometimes the parking requirements can be a barrier to being able to do that. Sometimes it's difficult to provide parking. And so if the city can provide its own parking in the downtown area, then that could maybe be used to satisfy some of the parking requirements. And long story short, that's a big policy barrier with creating more walkable communities. We've also created a catch-all project that we're calling Strategic Parking Management. And this would allow the city to begin collecting funding to address anything from site acquisition, design, engineering, and construction of various parking improvements in the Station Core and Downtown Historic District. This is accompanied by a recommendation for a next step initiative to do a parking management plan. And that plan would look in more detail at what are the parking needs downtown? How can we create first and last mile solutions to the train station? So how can we connect multimodal facilities to the train station? And also how can we create a park once environment? So by park once environment, we mean when people come into Longwood, say for an event or whatever it may be, they could park one time and they could use other means to travel around the city. And we won't get too much into that because we're covering a lot today. But again, if you want to talk more about that concept, I'm happy to do that afterwards. And so along those lines, one of the things that we're recommending that money could be used for is to develop a mobility hub. And we've developed a preliminary concept that we're calling the Sun Hub. And the idea is that you would take a central location in proximity to the train station. So that may be the site of the existing Sunrail parking. It might be another site if another opportunity comes up. But you could take that site and develop it into a mobility hub that would provide mobility services and options for getting around town. And so a mobility hub, the typical amenities that you might see would be vehicle parking, bicycle parking, information kiosks with information about mobility services or about Longwood, things like wayfinding. And so we believe that this would be a great asset for the community. And we've also recommended a follow-up initiative for the city to look into doing a pilot program to run a micro transit circulator from the Sun Hub to various places throughout the city. And that's something that could start as a service for special events. So I had a picture of it here, but I don't know if I can go back that far. So in the bottom right, this is a microtransit circulator. These are becoming more and more popular in communities in South Florida. So they're essentially large golf carts, and they're operating as transit services in some communities. So we thought that could be a cool idea for Longwood and something that could start as a service for special events. And then as redevelopment occurs, and if it's successful, it could be expanded into a more regular service. So we talked about how the mobility plan can be leveraged to create and enhance public space in the community. We have Ryder Park, we have the historic downtown district, we may have Island Lake boardwalk, and then we also have the train station, the Sunrail area. So it's also important to ensure that these areas are connected to each other and that people can reach these key destinations in the city from residential areas. So we wanted to look at how do we improve the multimodal accessibility throughout the city. And when you look at Longwood on a map and you look at the transportation network, you'll notice that in the older part of the city to the east of Ronald Reagan, you have a nice gridded street network. When you look at the parts west of Ronald Reagan, this is the part of the city that was more recently developed, and you have more of a suburban style transportation network, right? And this is something that we call modern curvilinear. So this is your curving streets, your dead ends, your cul-de-sacs, that kind of thing. And so from a transportation planning perspective, the modern curvilinear has some benefits, but from a traffic perspective, it also presents some issues. So when you have less connectivity in your grid network, you're forcing a lot of the traffic out onto just a few streets, right? Your collectors and your arterials. And this is when you get traffic because everybody's taking the same route to their destination, as compared to a traditional grid network where you have many options of getting from A to B. The traffic is a little bit more dispersed, and you generally have better traffic flow. So with that idea in mind, we wanted to look at, in the western part of the city, how do we increase connectivity and make it easier for people to get around? Now, retrofitting the vehicular network can be a challenge. It's expensive, it's time consuming, and I even recognize as a planner that some people live on cul-de-sacs for a reason, right? So instead of proposing street openings or street connectivity, we looked at how can we at least connect these streets for multimodal traffic. And so the picture on the right is an example that I took from Gainesville of what that could look like. So instead of keeping the street or opening the street, you could just put a trail. And I'll show you why that matters. These are two projects that we've proposed with that goal in mind. The first, and I apologize, the map is not rendering very well. The first project is, just trying to see if I have a pointer here. The first project is number 10, and that goes from Bucksaw Place and Hidden Oak Estates to Freeman Street. And we've proposed that as a boardwalk. The reason we've proposed it as a boardwalk is because it runs through some conservation areas. Boardwalks are known for being lower impact development and more environmentally sensitive. So we think could be a good location for a boardwalk. And the reason being, if you live in Hidden Oak Estates, or there's another neighborhood to the north there that I don't know the name of, you have to go all the way up to Long Hill Road and all the way around to Ronald Reagan if you want to go down to Ryder Park or the train station or the hospital. That's about 1.5 miles or more drive. If you open up that boardwalk connection, that cuts the distance down to 1/2 mile. So now you're talking about a walkable distance or a bikeable distance. And so that was the thinking behind that project, that as this area that we're standing in right now redevelops, and as we enhance the area around the train station, we would want to shorten the distances it would take to get there so that we can encourage people to bike and walk more. The second project is a trail that we've proposed between West Church Avenue to Freeman Street. And it's the same idea behind that project, is that if you're living in the western neighborhoods, that you would have easier access to the train station with that connection. And so we talked about how the mobility plan creates a framework for innovation and thinking differently about how we design our streets. I know some in the room are familiar with roadway level of service, others may not be. So just as a quick summary, roadway level of service is the traditional methodology that planners and transportation engineers use to evaluate deficiencies, to evaluate the roadway system, and to prioritize what projects get built, right? But roadway level of service is focused on service for cars and doesn't pay much attention to multimodal travel, what it's like to be a person walking on the street, that kind of thing. And so this having a methodology that's focused on road level of service has created a planning system where we are very focused on widening roads, building new roads as a solution for congestion. And what we see, and what many of you may have experienced in your own lifetimes, is that this brings induced demand. So when you widen a road or you build a new road, a few years later, you're sitting in congestion again and you have the same problem. And so as planners, we're starting to recognize this and think a little bit differently about how we can plan to solve congestion. And so the Florida statute recommends developing quality of service standards in conjunction with mobility plans. And so for the city of Longwood, we have developed street quality of service standards, which can be used in conjunction with level of service. And this is really for the transportation geeks in the room. But the quality of service standards are focused on how safe a street is for all road users rather than how many vehicles the street can move. And so when you transition the focus on safety, you open up a new framework for designing roads differently, accommodating multimodal travel, and it makes it easier to design streets differently within the planning and policy framework. And so quality of service is based on posted speed limits, and it's the opposite of LOS. As speed limits go up, QoS goes down, and vice versa. And the assumption there is that lower speeds create safer streets for all people. So streets at a lower speed would have a higher quality of service. And this allows the city to design roads for the speed that they want to see rather than the traditional approach, which has been to design roads for how fast we think cars are probably going to go. And so on that note, the plan proposes a number of projects related to safety, including a residential traffic calming program. We've also identified some priority traffic calming streets that the city should first look at when they implement that program. And that program would look at what kinds of improvements can the city implement for traffic calming. So you'd see things like chicanes in the bottom left, mini traffic circles, speed tables. You already have some examples of traffic calming in Longwood, but this is something that has a really great impact on making streets, especially residential streets, safer for people. We've also recommended a number of multimodal crossings at key locations. Those include anything from trail crossings to pedestrian hybrid beacons. For those that don't know, that's the picture in the right-hand corner. It's basically a pedestrian signal. Rectangular rapid flashing beacons you see in the lower right-hand corner, as well as other mid-block crossing projects. And then we've proposed several multimodal intersection improvements, which would include updating signage and pavement markings and enhancing visibility for people crossing the road. Okay, last slide. Finally, I talked about the plan studies, programs, and policies subplan. So this is a full list of the follow-on initiatives and next step programs that we've recommended in the mobility plan. And we feel strongly that these would be important initiatives for the city to also undertake in order to effectively implement the projects in the mobility plan. So I've mentioned some of these already. I'll point out the railroad safety study because I know we have at least one person in the audience that is interested in that. The idea behind that being that Georgia Avenue is a pretty dangerous crossing. There's been some issues with that railroad crossing. There have been cars that have been hit by trains at that location. And so we think it's important for the city to undergo a study to look at, does that crossing need to be closed? If we closed it, where would we put another opening? And maybe it doesn't mean a closure. Maybe it just means we need some additional safety measures there. But it's clear to us that that's something that needs to be addressed. So happy to talk about that in more detail with anyone. And with that, we're going to take a pause. I know that was a lot of information. I appreciate you sitting through it with me. We'll get up and wiggle around a little bit, get our energy back. Feel free to come up and look at the boards, ask questions, take time to fill out a comment card. Maybe we'll give, what time are we at? Okay. Okay. So we'll give 20 minutes to have some discussion. Happy to maybe we'll take 5 minutes for questions, and then we'll have people come up. When we're done with that, my colleague Jonathan is going to come up and talk about the mobility fee, which is also an important aspect of this project. So does anyone have a question? Okay. No. So when I was talking about the multimodal connections, those would be just for biking, walking, scooting, and would not allow for vehicular access. I'm not sure I totally understand your question. Yeah. Okay. Right. Um, So it may change, and that's something that we'd love to have feedback from you on. One of the follow-up programs that we're recommending is a micromobility and microtransit ordinance. So the city doesn't have anything now in its code that regulates those types of vehicles. So it defaults to state law. And so by state law, you're not allowed to drive a golf cart on public roads. You can only drive them in subdivisions. So if the city would want that to change, they would have to adopt an ordinance that would allow for it. And that's a policy decision and a community decision, right? Right. So, right. Thank you. Okay. Right. Yeah. No, that's a great idea. And Shad, I'll let you jump in.
Of course, this has come up before, and the biggest thing on any kind of pedestrian, say, bridge or skywalk or anything, is they're cost prohibitive, plus the height they need to be. If you go over the railroad track, for instance, I believe it's 21 or 22 feet above. So, I mean, that's a good 6 feet above what a road would be. So, I mean, it's a very high bridge. So then you have to have a long runway out because you have to meet ADA. And so it gets pretty complicated. Usually the places that you're most likely to use one is if, like Seminole County has done in places that it's either a high use trail or like they've had some at schools because there's so many kids going from one side to the other. Otherwise, if it's an occasional use, it's just not cost effective. It's actually probably cheaper to pay police to stop traffic and let everybody cross it's a lot cheaper than ever building a bridge. And a bridge causes a lot of other problems of coming over. And then some people bring up the tunnel options. Well, the tunnel options, most of Longwood is a problem because our water table is just too high. And some of the places the county has done it, fortunately, where they are, the water table's low because the Wekiva has pulled down the water table, so they are able to do tunnels. So that's some of the background information. So I know one of the commissioners at one point brought up trying to do one from where you're even talking over at that Sunrail station and bring it over here. It's a real long way. And it's, you know, it was like 30 million a couple years ago. I mean, I don't even know what it would be now. It's just very cost prohibitive. We could do so much more with that money before we'd ever try to build a bridge. I mean, maybe in the next 20-year plan, it could be feasible because you'd have to have a lot more traffic. But right now, we just don't have the demand plus with the cost. So it's kind of the background. Yeah, and I mean, we've even done that like for our Fourth of July celebration, the Freedom and Fireworks, which will happen again this year, even bigger than last year. But we use that, and we've rented I don't know, the golf carts that carry like 8 or 10 passengers, and we've done a lot of that. And we have agreements with the hospital to park in there in those lots. And we actually, last year, we even had agreements with the Winn-Dixie and even the place across the street as different areas, depending upon the volume of the people we get. And so that's for big events. That's what we've been doing. And as time goes by and Sunrail shifts over to a Central Florida commuter rail committee, I forget what it's called, but they have some weird acronym. It's Sunrail, but it starts being controlled by the 3 counties in the city of Orlando, the 4 entities. When that comes in, that'll be a change, and then we can kind of get with them, negotiate how we use those lots. Because right now we're not kind of supposed to use them, but we just kind of we just kind of use them passively because there's so many parking spaces. So for events, they're perfect, and Sunrail doesn't run on weekends. So why do you have all these empty parking spaces? It's a big waste. So those are some of the agreements, and we have some county folks here too. As we go forward, we'll do more negotiation with that and make those happen. And some of the easy ways to do that is that some of those small mobilities, not necessarily the micro mobility, but like she even had up the little bus, or even just you rent the golf carts for those events. And we've done that before, and I think we're going to continue to do that because there's always questions and a push for that. So, yeah. Thanks. Good questions. Appreciate it. Mhm. That's part of what I think she mentioned, that it's a study, because we need to look at that. Like, do we do a full closure? Do we only allow ped crossing closure? Is it only, say, eastbound versus westbound? Because part of the problem there is, like, even a school bus comes over and they have to stop, they're actually almost sticking over the railroad track as they're going westbound. So you kind of run into issues because it's so close. The queue it's so short. And so that's part of what you'd have to look at, and we'd have to get with Sunrail and FDOT, and eventually it comes back to CSX still has some rights through there, and whether or not we could try to maybe move the railroad crossing. That's part of our thoughts, is try to put it on the other side of town, like over in the industrial area, and try to do a crossing over there. Because we have Orange and we have Palmetto and even Church, and then you also have Georgia, and Georgia's the problem one, and we've known about it for a while. So that's what the study needs to do, and that's part of the next steps of, why it's into mobility. But, yeah. Mhm.
And we have recommended. If you could put
Right.
that on a comment card, that'd be great.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. 'Cause that's
But
one we didn't actually, I think a few years ago, we've thought about all this kind of drawn lines everywhere on a map. And I think we even did that. Okay, good. We put a trail here, 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 here. And I don't remember why that one kind of fell off. We tried not to go too crazy. And so, but please put it on a card. I think that's good to keep on a, yeah, because I know it's a big wetland through there, but a boardwalk is, yeah. Right.
exactly. And I don't know if I completely followed which direction you were talking about, but that is what Project 10 there on the map is, a boardwalk that goes over
Yeah,
the
I think he's
conservation area.
more in here up to Longwood
Okay.
Hills
Yeah, we
on
can
this
take a,
side. Yeah,
I think you're right. I think
yeah, right, right. Yes, right. Yeah, Johnny Lane and that little piece over there. That's where I thought you meant.
okay, yeah, we can take a look at that. Hi.
and so forth. But the thing with Longwood is that it's kind of like a Bermuda Triangle. You know, you have congestion by two means: people bypassing the train and also bypassing the traffic that accumulates on 434. So, that said, that we have to be forward thinking. The citizens of Longwood are being invited to be part of this walkable community because they're already taking part of it, but it's not safe. And we can't wait 22 years for traffic calming measures. People continue to bypass the train and the congestion between 434 and Ronald Reagan, and they take these residential roads that are veins to Ronald Reagan and 434 as for speeding. And just on our street alone, I already know two people that have been hit. And that's just 10 houses, you know? And the amount of people that continue to even my father, I just picked him up from the airport. He's almost been hit like when parking, and it's not inviting, and we can't wait for traffic calming measures, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the great things about traffic calming is it's quick build and low cost. So that is one of the projects in the plan that the city could begin implementing immediately as soon as it starts. I mean, the city could, as soon as it can find money to do it, could go into developing the traffic calming program. And then as soon as you're collecting funds through the mobility fee, we can start implementing some of that stuff in a matter of just a few years, not 22 years. So that's the great thing about traffic calming.
Yeah, there's some pages in the mobility plan that talk about traffic calming because we don't really have a plan right now. We kind of just have a memo that we're just kind of copying and following the guidelines the county had because we didn't really have any. And so just kind of as a default, we defaulted to the counties. In the past, different things were done and it gets complicated and different agencies like different things. Fire department hates traffic calming because it slows them down, but traffic calming is better because then people don't get hit. So you don't need to have a fire department as much because then people are safer. So it's this whole game but that's why we put it in there. We have some means to do it. And there's other traffic calming measures that are in the mobility plan and in the bike ped plan both, such as raised intersections and there's like the bikeway, and there's other things that are in these two plans that help give us means to do that. I'd love to know what your street is, and you can just you could write it down or whatever. I know we're trying to
Yeah,
get some of these other
come up
things.
and give us a comment on the board
Yeah.
before you leave and let us know.
Yeah, I just want to point out just one small point of clarification. Like, we need a year to have this on, so it's not like wait until then and do it. A lot of these things some things are already underway. So some of the recommendations, they're designed, they're waiting for construction. Other ones, they're an idea, right? The next step is to do more of a feasibility study, or sometimes the feasibility study's been done and the next step is design. So just my point is that they're all in different phases of development, and the stuff that we were just talking about with traffic calming, that can happen pretty quick, and there's no reason to really wait on it. And I think the city certainly does recognize that you do have people cutting through the neighborhoods, and that's not optimal, right? We'd rather have people on the main arterials, and
Yeah.
we want to take steps to make sure that we're limiting the amount of cut through that's happening in those neighborhood roads. Part of that is by having these facilities where there is that connectivity, and other things are put in place to either have vertical deflection like speed humps, or horizontal deflection that just make it less convenient to go through the neighborhoods. So definitely stuff that we care about. And again, with the comments, if you want to be specific, please let us know. And that's something that yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
We're doing the study right now. One of our other consultants is here. They're doing a study for us on West Bay. So we're doing that. We're trying some striping things, other things that are real low cost things that do help slow people down. Side friction is a term, whether it's striping as side friction or trees or different things you can do. Those are simple things we could do. Some of those are simple things. We don't even have to have a mobility plan. But, you know, we're open to those where we have money set aside to kind of study some of those things. Some of the good news, well, good and bad, is like yesterday, we got confirmation from DOT that they're moving forward with funding 434 in Ronald Reagan. So that is supposed to happen early next year, sometime March timeframe. Now it'll probably take them a year or more to build it. And at the same time, they're going to do all of 434 from Range Line 2, actually Mingo, which is kind of the city limits, which is on the other side of 1792. And so they'll do improvements through the whole corridor, which is great news because we've been pushing for it. Metro Plan, which for some of those know what that is, that's our regional 3-county planning organization that helps do projects. They've done an initial study of trying to do different options to get people through the train through and so forth. So that's kind of going to the next steps. The county will be doing a lot of that, of what we can do with the intersection, because a lot of that cut through is all because people drive up 17 or 434 or Ronald Reagan, and you just get stuck and you're just waiting there and waiting there and waiting there. And so people are like, okay, why am I doing this? I'll just go up Church, or I'll go up Warren, or I'll go around. And part of the problem with that is those people doing it then speed and go way too fast. They're not taking their time and they're not being careful. And that's part of what we want to put measures in place. So if you do it, okay, you're going 15, you know, you're going slow if you're doing it, and maybe it's not even saving you any time. So trying to discourage it so we can keep the pedestrian safe. That's what we want to do. And you know, we've had these discussions with lots of folks. And that's what we want to do. And that's why we have a mobility plan. So.
Maybe before we run out of time, we'll let Jonathan come up and talk about the mobility fee, and then I'm happy to stick around as late as I need to talk with people.
My name is Jonathan Paul. I'm the principal of New Urban Concepts, and Lauren's been working with the city here for over a year now, developing the mobility plan. It's kind of the exciting part of all this, and now we're going to talk about a very technical subject, mobility fee. Does anybody know what a mobility fee is? Well, it's not an engineer, so any of the residents know what the mobility fee is. Well, absolutely. That's perfect. And yes, some people do refer to it as a tax, but it is not a tax because it's not something that's levied on existing homeowners or existing businesses. It's only for new development, and it's only a one-time charge. So when a new project comes in, and you know, like the hospital reconstructing and building a building there, they would pay a mobility fee. They probably paid a mobility fee to Seminole County. If you're coming in, you're putting in a gas station, a fast food, a new residence, you would pay a mobility fee to help fund the projects on the mobility plan, to help fund the bicycle projects. Right now, the county charges a mobility fee within the city of Longwood, and the county has the ability to spend that money anywhere in Seminole County. They don't have to spend the money, you know, so they collected money from the hospital. There's no requirement that they spend that money in Longwood. They could spend it in Sanford, they could spend it in Oviedo, they can spend it in Altamont, they can spend it anywhere. So one of the purposes of this mobility plan and mobility fee is to give Longwood the ability to collect that money and spend it to fund the projects that you all are interested in here. 'Cause otherwise, it just goes to the county and it just goes into some fund somewhere to build something somewhere, but it isn't likely going to be within your community. And so really, it is an opportunity to take those monies that are now going to the county, and now it goes annually into Longwood. So staff has money to fund traffic calming, to fund bicycle lanes. And it is based on the projects that are identified in the mobility plan. And so there is a direct connection between the impact of a new development coming in, the traffic they generate, the money they have to pay to then help build this transportation system. There are a number of steps that actually go into developing mobility fee. One of them is amending the city's comprehensive plan to establish the intent to do a fee. That's something that was already done several years ago. So it's already noted in the policies of the city to say we'd like to explore this option to fund it. The next step is actually the mobility plan and the mobility fee itself, and then what's known as an ordinance or an implementing ordinance. And those are the laws that actually govern how the fee is administered, how it's collected, how it's assessed. And it is, again, a fee. It's not assessed on any of your existing homes, any of your existing businesses. It's for new development that comes in to the community. And then there are a bunch of follow-on steps that actually go on. So once you've gone through all this, then city staff actually has to implement it. They've got to go do the studies. They've got to go do the design. They've got to go get additional funding for it. So this is kind of the real high level first step. And then there are multiple steps that go on after that for how you actually spend the money and build the projects. Longwood's not new. This is something that's actually been around within Florida for a number of years. It was discussed all the way back in 2007. And that's kind of during a time that there was a Great Recession, so it didn't really move forward as much. In 2013, the Florida legislature actually authorized mobility fees, and they're intended to replace what's known as a road impact fee. So the county used to collect a road impact fee, and that can only go towards widening roads. And if you look at the discussions today, the questions today, you're all concerned about pedestrian safety, bicycling, railroad safety, access. I didn't hear anybody, I mean, obviously congestion's a big issue, but I don't necessarily hear anybody saying we got to go 8-lane, 434, 6-lane this road, or do that. And you see the mobility plan, the bike plan, there really aren't any roadway widening projects. So a lot of communities in Florida face that same dilemma. We don't have any roads to widen, or we don't want to widen any roads, and we're charging developers to widen roads. And it doesn't make any sense. So the legislature said, we agree with you. If you want to be an urban area, you want to be a city, you've got to fund the things that people want: sidewalks, bike lanes, traffic calming. And so a number of communities, the one I worked in previously in Alachua County up in Gainesville, actually served as a pilot for the state of Florida back in 2009. They adopted it. Pasco, Sarasota, a couple other communities came in, and I'd say there's probably 5 or 6 communities statewide up until about 2015. But since that time, there's communities all the way from the Panhandle down to Miami Beach, St. Augustine, the Naples area, all over the state that are looking to move in this direction. And because really there's a lot of other residents in the state, just like you all, that want their community safer. And they want to have a means to do that, and to have development help pay for a portion of that. And so, if you really wanted to have, if you have insomnia and you want to get some sleep, we have a detailed technical report that has a lot of legalese that goes into it and a lot of fun calculations. It's about 200 pages in length and goes through all the documents, all the analysis, all the requirements the lawyers put out there, the legislature puts out there. But in essence, it's something we have to prepare to serve as the basis for the fee itself. I'm really not going to go into all these. We have the calculations back there. If you really wanted to know about it, I'd be happy to talk to you. about it. I've been doing this for 25 years now, so it's obviously I'm a nerd and something I love, but most people don't really find it that exciting. So the end result of all this planning, that technical report, all the language that goes into it is essentially these are the type of land uses that you expect to see coming in the city. And this is the type of fee that they would pay. And again, it is intended to replace Seminole County's mobility fee. And so we've provided a chart of what the land uses are, how we measure them in terms of square footage, dwelling units, what have you, what the county charges today, and then what's the difference between the two of them. And you'll notice on the residential category, we're recommending charging it per square foot. So somebody that wants to come in and build a smaller home, 400 square foot, 600 square foot, if they're in the county, they're going to pay the same amount as somebody building a 2,500 square foot house. Okay. And then if I think the county caps it at about 3,000 square feet. So somebody came in and built a 5,000 square foot house, they'd pay the same as somebody building a 3,000 square foot. What we found in a lot of the communities that we work in, folks that want to build smaller homes are doing so, one, either because they don't want as much space or they can't necessarily afford it. And so it makes more sense to have a fee that's actually based on the square footage. So smaller homes pay less, larger homes pay more. So if you have a bigger impact to your overall community, you're going to pay more. So it looks like the city's, potentially reducing the fee versus the county. Well, that's because the county charges per dwelling unit. Doesn't matter the square footage of it. I think the county has 2 or 3 tiers. So 1,500 to 2,500, 2,500 and above. This is just going to be a flat rate. So it's coming in and you're building a small home, a tiny home. You're building a 1,500 square foot house. That's what you'd pay them. Likewise for hotel rooms, the fee's pretty similar to the county's, a little bit higher than theirs. For community uses, like places of worship, a church, any type of civic, they have a fee that they would pay. Long-term care would be assisted living facilities, and then private education. Florida statute exempts charter schools and public schools from fees, so they are not required to pay them. But a daycare and private schools are required to pay those. So that's the fee, and it comes in a little bit higher than Seminole County's. Likewise, we have industrial uses. City isn't something that's really promoting a whole lot of industrial uses, and actually their impact's relatively low. There's a fee for outdoor recreation. So somebody comes in and builds tennis courts and they actually charge people to use them, they would have to pay. But if it's part of your development and it's for the residents of that community, then they wouldn't be assessed a fee on that. There's also fees for offices and for medical office uses. Likewise, there's a number of categories for retail. We did include a category for local businesses and small retail. This is something that kind of came out of the COVID pandemic and a lot of communities trying to help local businesses. Sometimes, the way the standard fees are, the county's fee, a local coffee shop has to pay the same as a Starbucks. A local sandwich shop or a burger place has to pay the same thing as a Chick-fil-A. Well, what we said is that's really not, they don't have the same impacts. If they had the same impacts, they'd be doing amazing business and they probably wouldn't mind paying the fee. But the reality is most local businesses struggle, they're not generating as much traffic. So we have included a category in there that's roughly half of the fee for other types of retail uses. The city would need to establish criteria for what's a small business, but it is something that at least helps to offset some of that impact. And then for some of the uses that do generate a lot of traffic, the fast foods of the world, the Chick-fil-A's, your supermarkets, your ABC Liquors, some of those things that generate a lot of traffic, they do actually pay a higher fee, and they pay a higher fee than what they pay in the county today because they have a bigger impact to the overall transportation system. Likewise, there's a movement in terms of banking to go to smaller banks or just freestanding ATMs. Right now, the county's fee doesn't even collect for that. We've added a category in there. So if you're providing a number of drive-through lanes or freestanding ATMs, you'd have to still pay for your impact. Likewise for gas stations, number of fuel pumps. And then for fast food, I'm not sure if you've had any here. In the city, but a lot of communities we work in, you know, there used to be a Chick-fil-A was 3,000 to 4,000 square feet, had a playground for kids, had other types of amenities. More and more of those uses are starting to come in at 1,000 square feet or, 1,500 square feet. But where they had one drive-through lane before, now they have two, three. We've actually had one recently come in Sarasota County, Taco Bell. The Taco Bell itself is only 600 square feet. The food actually comes from a conveyor belt above the drive-through lanes, but there's 4 drive-through lanes. And so if you're charging a fee per square foot, you're really not going to capture the true impact of that. And so this schedule really focuses on what are the uses that generate the traffic, what are the uses that have the biggest impact to the system, and making sure that they pay an appropriate fee. So we did a number of analyses that go into it. There's really not a whole lot of guidance in statute when it comes to a city replacing a county fee. It just says, do your analysis and kind of work it out. Well, we've worked in a number of communities and we've come across a couple of different metrics that we look at. One is how many lane miles exist in the city, and does the city own them? Does the county own them? Does FDOT, DOT own them? So in this instance, roughly 35% of the roads within Longwood are owned and maintained by Seminole County. Of those, 21% of the traffic is on county roadways. Vast majority of it's actually on state roads, your larger state arterials. But it's one of the metrics we look at to figure out how the city would negotiate with the county in terms of, do they just take the entire fee? Do they take 80% of it, 90% of it? We're recommending, we've calculated 100%, but then the city itself could actually set aside money for improvements to a county road if the county came in and said, hey, we want to make this improvement, or we want to do a sidewalk here. The city would actually have some money to contribute towards that. And so the biggest number we look at is, of all those projects identified, how much of them or how much of the cost is actually on county roads? And it's roughly 3%. So the vast majority of the improvements proposed are on city roads, some state roads, and then some of the county projects, but the vast majority are on city roadways. And so this would really, when you go into having negotiations with the county, and so for example, we did the mobility plan, mobility fee for Altamont Springs. The city of Altamont Springs sets aside 10% of the money it collects to go towards county projects. We're doing the city of Oviedo. The city of Oviedo has a major county road right through it, County Road 419. The city wants that road widened to 4 lanes. It's roughly about a $35–40 million project. It's a big project. So as part of their fee, they're setting aside 25% of the money they collect to go towards the county road projects. Here, in reality, it makes sense for the city either to collect 100%, 90% of it, and then set aside some portion of it for the county. Seminole County is a little bit different in that the actual ordinances, I go back to that term we mentioned earlier, city ordinances control over the county. The vast majority of places in Florida, it's the opposite. So a county ordinance trumps any city ordinance. So if the county said, we're going to impose our fee and you've got to collect it, a lot of cities don't have a choice. So they've got to go through a lot of analyses to demonstrate what they should be collecting. Seminole County is a little bit more unique in that it gives its cities a lot more power than most elsewhere in the state. This is just some legal requirements, but basically the fee, if you're going to charge a development a fee, it has to be related to their impact. And so what that whole study is how does this dollar amount we're requiring you as a developer to pay relate to the traffic that you generate? Right now, the fees would just be assessed within the city of Longwood. And should the city annex any areas in the future, they would be assessed there as well, but they won't be assessed in unincorporated county or elsewhere. So this is what we've known as, call it an assessment area. The one difference is the benefit district is where the money's collected is where it can be spent. Because there are some state road projects and there are some county road projects, and traffic and people bicycling and walking don't stop at the city limits. Most of y'all probably don't even know on a day-to-day basis when the city and the county switches over jurisdictions, especially in a place like Longwood where it kind of jogs back and forth. What this basically does, is it allows the city to have some funds. So if FDOT or in the county is doing a project, a trail, a roadway improvement, and they want to make a boardwalk or a sidewalk or a bike lane connection to it, the city would have some funds to contribute towards that project to help benefit the overall community. And so with that, I'm not going to go into a whole lot more detail unless you really want to know about fees, but we are here today to get impact from you all on the plans, the projects that we have. And this really is the first step. These are required by statute to be updated every 5 years. So this is kind of looking at a 20-year vision. And the more immediate projects are something that, the city staff is definitely interested in getting your feedback on so they can make a recommendation to the commission on what to prioritize. Our next step based on the feedback that we received from you all is to make any changes to the plan. Then we go for a first reading to the city commission where they'd hear the ordinance. It'll be advertised. So any of you all that want to go talk to the commission and voice your concerns or talk about traffic or projects you want to see, that'd be a great opportunity. The commission at that point can direct staff to make any changes. Staff would then tell us, hey, we need to make this and that. If there aren't any, then we basically go to a second reading and then becomes adopted. And then we got to talk to the attorneys about what days it goes into effect. But generally it becomes effective 90 days after the second hearing. And at that point, the city would start collecting money to help fund these projects. And so with that, I know it's a lot. The mobility fees is really kind of a technical nuance, but it is an important funding system for the city to have. And it does give the city more local control, whereas right now that money is just being spent anywhere within the community. So with that, I'd open it up to any questions on either the mobility plan or the mobility fee. Yes, sir. Well, right now, the city does not charge for transportation today. So the city does not have a road impact fee today. It's not getting in any money from any development at all. That money is all going to Seminole County. Under this scenario, it would stay in the city. One of the ways to encourage redevelopment or the local businesses is we did include that local category, and it's roughly half of what a retail use would pay, and it's roughly 70% less than what the county would charge. So that's kind of an incentive for the local based businesses. For the regular retail, it'll be similar to what the county's paying. But it's not something that the city could just say, we're not going to adopt anything. In county, you can assess it in here. If the city doesn't adopt something, the county has the right to assess it in the city. So it isn't like the fee would necessarily go away. Some communities that could work in, but other than offering some of the reductions, the percent reductions, that'd probably be the best way to encourage redevelopment or more local based business. It's riveting stuff.
You're also welcome to ask questions,
Yeah,
continuing our
of
previous
anybody.
discussion, because I know that was ongoing, so.
Sorry. You'd mentioned some areas that were priorities for street calming zones. Do you want to go over any of those?
I can read off the map here and tell you guys what we've looked at. So the priority traffic calming, and these are just recommendations to the city for what we think would be good to take a look at first when that program goes into place. But that program can be used to look at any street in Longwood. And the program would put a system and a process in place for residents to submit requests with the city if you want to see traffic calming on your street. But the streets that we prioritized in the plan as of now are Longsdale Ave, that's close to Candyland Park, Orange Ave, because this is one of the streets that you have full access from US 17 to Ronald Reagan. So people can use that more often for cut through traffic, and we want to discourage that in the residential neighborhoods. So that's why we chose that street. Freeman Street we chose because if the boardwalk gets built, if the multimodal connection gets built that I was talking about, this would be an important connection down to the historic district, and we want to prioritize that for multimodal travel, not for vehicles. We also did Grant Street because that has some great connections to other multimodal facilities, both existing and what was proposed in the bike ped plan. And then for Wildemere Ave, it was the same reasoning as behind Orange Ave, that you can access Ronald Reagan and Highway 17 through this neighborhood. So the general gist, I guess, of the recommendations are discouraging cut through traffic through your neighborhoods. Yeah. Any other questions? Mhm. Yeah, sure, absolutely. Yep.
Yeah, and please leave some comment cards because those do go into the public record.
Mhm.
And
Yeah, we've got Post-its up here. So we'll go ahead and adjourn the formal part of the meeting and folks can come up and look at the boards and talk with us. So thank you for coming.